Morning.
This is, I guess, technically the second of the priest and rabbi class. Last week we had Deanna Briotti talking about the Church of the Incarnation. I don't think I was able to announce this last week because we just confirmed it, that Deanna will be ordained as a priest here at Calvary. Did I say that? Yes. On Saturday, January 11th. So that was a very good thing. We have a handout when you go about it. What is this, Aaron?
So we're going to be talking about the Jewish high holidays today and the next couple of weeks. On Wednesday evening, Thursday, Friday, there will be Rosh Hashanah services around the Jewish world, and I'm inviting you to the one that I'll be leading for Friday morning in particular, and Justice David Wecht, Supreme Court Justice of Pennsylvania. David Wecht will be giving the sermon about anti-Semitism. So I hope you'll think to go if you're curious and have the time.
You are all welcome to attend services of the high holidays here at Calvary with Tree of Life, or you're welcome to attend. Where is this? You're going to have to put gas in your car. It's in the North Hills. It's not that far.
It's basically around Ross Park Mall.
Ross Park Mall. So fairly close. Here, you don't need a passport. It's not too far away. A thing that I learned 4 years ago, it's easier to say it as a matter-of-fact way. Anglo-Saxon white Protestant Christians, generally speaking, show up on time or 5 minutes after, and they stay to the end. Jews do not show up on time. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Regret. Sociologically, it's fair.
Sociologically, it's fair. And they don't stay the whole service. Our services are about an hour, give or take, on a normal Sunday. Rosh Hashanah, the one you're talking about here, will be 2 hours.
You'll be back in your car in 2 hours.
2 hours. Some of the services here, I remember the first year, not a single Tree of Life person was here the entire time other than Rabbi Myers. But some of the Calvary people would stay for like 4 hours. And it's like, no one stays the whole time. It's kind of a come and go thing. So this would be a 2-hour experience for you.
Fair enough.
Today we're talking about the high holidays, specifically talking about calendars and how we count or measure time. Just that one simple thing shapes how we see the world. Aaron?
Okay. Good morning. Good to be back with you.
Do you want to pray with us?
Yes, let me get started. That's fine. So I'll begin with the blessing over study that we've been sharing the last few years. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'tzosav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for giving us texts that lend meaning to our lives. Okay, let's talk about calendrics, first of all. Calendrics is the fancy word for the study of calendars. Calendrics. Horology is the study of timekeeping. Calendrics is the study of calendars, how they're created, how they're oriented, what they mean. So if I were to ask you, what is a calendar good for? What might you say? Why do we have a calendar, appreciate calendars? What do calendars do for us? Keep track of time, such that we can all agree that today is September 29th, right? September 29th, 2024, which is a fiction that we call this day Sunday, and we call this day the 29th of September, and the year is 2024. It allows us to track time such that you can know something about past dates, such that you know how old you are, or how long ago something took place. It allows us to make plans for next Wednesday, because we all are in agreement about how we're labeling these parcels, these units of time, such that after a certain number of them, we arrive at Christmas, or we arrive at New Year's, or whatever it may be, yes? So calendars allow us to track time. What else do they do? We'll keep track of appointments. Plan ahead. Okay, that's tracking time. Jeffrey?
They try to give time substance. In other words, so that you see that it's a year, or it's this many years, or something like that, or that there's a chunk, like a season.
Good. Let me see if I can paraphrase, because I think there's a lot in that, right? It gives us a means of understanding units of time or breaking time down into smaller parcels or units such that, if you remember, or if you ever ask someone how old their baby is, they may give it to you in weeks. Yes? Until a certain amount of weeks are too many to count weeks. Do you know how many weeks old you are? No, you could figure it out. How many months old you are? No, not any longer, though you could figure it out. Years we track in that way. And then you know, or how many moons have passed, right? It gives us an opportunity to reflect on not just the passage of time or to locate something in a historical context or to plan ahead such that we know that 18 months from today this will happen or it's scheduled to happen. But what else does it do by giving us substance? Celebrate?
I'm celebrating 48 years
48 years
of Calvary today.
of Calvary today. That's wonderful. Mazel tov, as we say. Yeah? Yes?
Seasons, like more agricultural or whatever seasons.
Okay, so if we know that we're measuring time in a certain way, we know what happens in a cyclical way, or what we do annually or seasonally in that way. I want to suggest also, and most significantly for this conversation this morning, that calendars also give us a sense of who we are, what group we're part of, what we value. So if today is September 29th, 2024, what does that suggest? What happened 2024 years ago? What does the number 2024 give us a sense of? Or what are we measuring from in what we call the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that was commissioned by Pope Gregory? Christ's birth, right? And it's not important per se, theologically, it's not important whether or not Jesus was actually born on the 25th of December or on January 1st, or, right? But the idea is that the calendar is measuring from that point forward because that event is so significant in the community that orients itself around the Gregorian calendar that we're going to speak of time relative to BC, before Christ, and then CE or AD, right, as of that moment. And if you're a Christian, that makes perfect sense. The rest of us play in that world or swim in those waters, but we appreciate that's a particular calendar, the Gregorian calendar that we operate on, such that you identify your birthday based on that, yes? And today's date is based on that. But what do other calendars measure from? What the Muslim calendar measures from, or the Chinese calendar, or the Hindu calendar? Native Americans have calendars. They operate from a certain point in history from which they begin to measure time. Does that make sense? Jeffrey?
Another in the substantial column is our connection to the astronomical details that they actually are based on.
I'm sorry, say it again.
In the substance column, they are also about the astronomical details from which they are based.
I'm not sure what that means. Help us.
A month is how long it takes the moon.
Okay, so now we're getting into different things. Now we're getting to how we keep track of time. So, if you're in a lunar calendar, you're watching the phases of the moon. And we appreciate that even in our own idiomatic vernacular, what does a new moon mean? What does a blue moon mean? You know what a new moon is? Yeah. What is it? You don't see it. You don't see it. So new moon is actually no moon for our purposes, the new moon, and then it goes through its cycle such that we see more and more of it till we get a full moon, which in a Jewish calendar means that the moon is full and it's the middle of the month. Hebrew calendar is a calendar that's lunar. And so when the month begins, that's when the new moon arrives, or there's no moon visible in a clear night sky. And then for 28 days, we're in that month because we're in that cycle of the moon. And in the Jewish calendar, because the first of the month has no moon, the 14th of the month, a 28-day month, being a lunar cycle, not quite, but we'll address that in a moment, allows us to know where we are. So, just to appreciate the holiday of Passover, the Jewish holiday of Passover, which celebrates what? The Jews leaving Egypt, right? Moses leading them out. The angel of death passes over, but the idea is that Passover becomes okay, just lost my train of thought. Just lost my train of thought. Passover becomes the month that we begin counting in the spring in that cycle, and in the fall we do a different calendar. We all operate on many different calendars at the same time. What kind of calendars do you operate on? What's that? The Gregorian? Gregorian. The current calendar, such that today is September 29th. What other calendars do you rely on in your own lives? Today's Sunday, so a weekly calendar, right? And in this church, or in this Christian community, this Sunday has a particular name relative to what? John, will you help us?
St. Michael's Day, our patron festival or feast.
And it may also have a number relative to what's taken place more recently or prospectively.
Sundays after Pentecost, for example.
Right?
Or Easter Day, or the third Sunday of Advent.
Yes, we're familiar with that terminology, but to appreciate that what it's doing is it's orienting you in time relative to something significant. Culturally significant, theologically significant, particularly significant. Let me bracket this and give us a footnote. In every religious tradition, there are what we call universalistic or universal tendencies, and there are particularistic tendencies. Universalism and particularism within religious traditions. Universalism are those parts of our religious tradition that apply to everybody. Everybody. Such as a commandment, you shall not murder. That's not just for Jews or just for Christians, that's a universal mandate. Observe the Sabbath day, or keep this holy in this particular way, that may be for a particular community. And if you're not Jewish, you're not expected to keep the laws of kosher, for instance. Those are particularistic laws. If you're not Christian, Sunday is Sunday. Right? There's a great line in the movie Rocky, where he goes to pick up Adrian, who's going to be his girlfriend, but for their first date. And he knocks on the door of their South Philadelphia row house, and Paulie, her brother, answers the door. And you see behind him a table festooned with all the trimmings of Thanksgiving feast. And he knocks on the door, Rocky does, Paulie answers, says, Rocky, what are you doing here? He says, I'm here to pick up Adrian for dinner. He says, Rocky, it's Thanksgiving, which is to say we're going to have dinner here at home with family. Today's Thanksgiving, and Rocky says, to you it's Thanksgiving. To me it's Thursday. Right? If you don't celebrate the holiday, or you don't have anyone with whom to mark that passage of time, it's just Thursday. It's your birthday? Congratulations. It's your anniversary of being Calvary? Amazing. For the rest of the world, it's Sunday, or it's the 29th of September. Does that make sense? So calendars allow us to track ourselves in time, to know where we are relative to something earlier that was significant, your own birth, for instance, or the birth of Jesus, which allows us to understand where we are in time relative to that, right? It gives us a sense of substance. We can break time into smaller units, and it gives us something about ourselves, about our particular community. Is that fair? What other calendars do we work with? Just daily, just so you appreciate that we're managing these all the time. There are fiscal years. If you're in business or on a board and working with an organization, you know something about a fiscal calendar. There's academic calendars. If you're in school or you have kids who are in school, your life is dictated by that schedule. If you have season tickets to a cultural event or to a sports team, you're aware of when the
Steelers calendar, we do our calendar based off the Steelers calendar most of the time.
That's right.
1 o'clock game today, for example.
Yes.
The calendar gets Methuselah being 900 years.
Okay. So let's talk about that. The Jewish calendar, or the Hebrew calendar, is introduced in about the 4th century. So the year's 300s in there. And the Jewish calendar figures it this way. They take all of the knowledge that they have about, if you will, recent history, the length of people's lives or the reign of certain monarchs or what have you, and then add that to the Bible, where we're told Methuselah was this many years old, or Noah was this many years old, or we're up on the mountain 40 days, 40 nights. You begin to add up all those 40 years in the desert, and you get back to a particular date that in Jewish consciousness, and this is you have to suspend disbelief again, is such that the year that we're in and concluding is 5784, 5784. And come Rosh Hashanah, the odometer ticks over another year, it's 5785. Okay. What is that? So I don't have an direct answer to the Methuselah, other than to say before the 4th century, in this calendar being introduced, calendars or the cycles of time were created by observation. You can know when there's a new moon or when there's a full moon, and you can begin counting from that. And we know the idiom, many moons ago, right? Or I haven't seen it for many moons as a way of tracking time. But what the Hebrew calendar does, I'll get your question in a moment, is go back to what ostensibly was the moment when God says, let there be light. It's a universalistic calendar. That is to say, I appreciate that it's Western and it's Judeo-Christian, if you will, but the Jewish calendar is a calendar that says, we believe, or we, in our limited minds, have to imagine that there was a day on which this all started, this world. We have a text that says God breathes life into the world, or with the word, in the beginning was the Word, that's from the Christian tradition, or let there be light, and we're going to start counting from that point forward. So while we don't believe actually, Jews don't believe actually the world is less than 6,000 years old, for the purposes of calendaring, remember, if calendars are simply fictions, sort of like your address, your home address, it's a fiction, right? They gave a name to a street, they gave numbers to every unit on that street, and you use them to locate yourself on a map. But the information in your address tells me nothing except how to locate you, right? And if you know the right combination of letters and numbers and you put them on an envelope and put a stamp on it, it'll find you. But it tells me nothing about who actually lives there, what type of dwelling it is, anything about its history. It just orients us. And that's what a calendar date does as well. Right? Jonathan, you want to jump in?
Sure. What is the Jewish structure to the year? You have months,
yes,
names. When's the start of the new year? How does that work?
Okay, so there are three types of calendars in this conversation. One is a lunar calendar where we're tracking the cycles of the moon. And every time the moon finishes a cycle, it's the next month. Solar calendars track the revolutions around the sun, the Earth's revolutions around the sun, which we know don't make for a perfect 365 days as we measure the cycle in units of days. And so we add an extra day, as you all know, every 4 years, and that readjusts the calendar such that what we expect to happen in their various seasons don't slip into other seasons. A lunar calendar that doesn't make any adjustment would be the Muslim calendar, which is lunar, but makes no adjustment for the fact that the addition of all these cycles of months doesn't quite equal the revolution around the sun. And so in Muslim tradition, holidays will begin to slip into other seasons. Does that make sense? If we didn't make the adjustment on February 29th...
That's not what I asked.
Oh,
let me try again. When does the Jewish New Year start? What is it?
What is the Jewish New Year?
Yeah. So what I'm getting at, and I'll say in just a moment about the Christian calendar, how those work is it gives value to time. It shapes time and how we understand the world to be and how our role within that. In the Christian calendar, what is the beginning of the church's new year? Advent. Advent is the beginning of the church's new year. Kind of strange. What is the...
Advent takes place when, or occurs when?
What's the feast of 4 weeks, and then what follows Advent? Christmas. So Christmas, in our Christian calendar, is based off of, to some degree, a date that was decided a long time ago, and it was supplanting another Roman god and so on, but December 25th. Fun Jeopardy fact, when is the Feast of the Annunciation? March 25th, 9 months before December 25th. So the angel Gabriel announces to Mary, you shall bear a son, 9 months exactly before Christmas Day. So that's how that one gets in there. Our Christian calendar is oriented around two feasts. Christmas, which is a set date, and so Advent is the 4 Sundays before December 25th, and Easter is the other major feast, and that is not on a set date. The Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon on or before the spring equinox. So March to April sometime. And all the other feasts in the year revolve around those two dates. So we start with Advent and 4 weeks, and it's not just arbitrary things we talk about. What is the themes, or are the themes of Advent? Anybody remember from confirmation class?
Yeah.
Preparation for Jesus' first coming, the incarnation. And by the way, Christmas doesn't celebrate Jesus' birthday like you'll see in memes around that time. Christmas is a celebration, observance of the incarnation, God becoming a human being in Jesus. So 4 weeks of preparation for the coming of Christ, the incarnation, and the other piece, which actually most of the readings are about, is what? The second coming of Christ, the return in glory, something that we almost, again, never think about. So those two themes, and then we hit Christmas, which is the incarnation. We will wear blue or purple for Advent. It's to, why colors? Because they elicit certain things, they mark things, they shape things, our thoughts, our themes, and so on. Christmas is white or gold. And then after Christmas, what season do we hit? Epiphany. We're going to redo confirmation, I think, next year. Epiphany, the word means manifestation. That is an observation or observance of when the wise men visited Jesus. And those, in Christmas and Epiphany, we always put angels and shepherds and like cows and all, lobsters right in the Jesus. We don't put lobsters, by the way, in the scene in the cradle. And then the wise men. Those are two different stories. We conflate them, we smush them together, which is a totally fine thing to do. We do that in calendars all the time. Take two ideas and put them together. President's Day is observing different presidents and so on. And so on Epiphany, we observe the wise men visiting the Christ child, which is God coming into the world, first with his own people, the Jews, and then Epiphany to the whole world, that is, to Gentiles. Epiphany is about 6 weeks there, and it ends. Let me throw in another piece. Natalie, my wife, and I used to live in New Orleans, and the beginning of Epiphany, how many days of Christmas are there? 12. Epiphany starts January 6th. In New Orleans, they have the normal calendar we all have, but they also have what they would call a carnival calendar. And on January 6th, they call it 12th night, the 12th night of Christmas moving into Epiphany, and that's when all the parties start. You do family things at Christmas, family and close friends, and on 12th night Epiphany, they're called the 12th night revelers. People start drinking and ride the streetcars and yelling woo for 5 hours or so. And then there are floats and parades, and it goes that way all through the season until you hit what? What's the big day for Mardi Gras? Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. That's how we think of it. In no way am I demeaning Pittsburgh because it's our favorite place ever, but we have pancakes and sausage. That's kind of lame. There you'd have all days of parades, huge feast, drinking beer and eating chicken and just getting the fat out, and it's this wild, amazing time, and that's how their calendar is oriented. And no one who's outside of New Orleans believes it. When midnight hits on Mardi Gras Day, so moving into Ash Wednesday, the next day, the police come along, actually fire trucks with fire hoses, follow the parades and say, get off the street, Mardi Gras is over, Lent has begun. And they spray down everything. If you're there in the way, they will spray you out of the way and arrest you. They move out, and it is a clear demarcation. This is over, this has begun. We slide in and out of different things. And so then you get Epiphany, and then following Epiphany is the season of Lent, beginning with Ash Wednesday. And what's that season mark or shape? Preparation for Easter, penance, penitence, forgiveness, preparing for Jesus' return. It's all those things. When we talk about the next 2 weeks, the idea is, particularly Yom Kippur, we don't have one-to-one analogous relationships in terms of like Judaism to Christianity. So our Lent is not their Yom Kippur. There are different things going on. But some of the theological themes, like forgiveness, atonement, are there, but they're expressed in very, very different ways. And that, to me, is a fascinating idea, how we deal with the idea of, what does atonement mean, by the way? Forgiveness, reunification, reconciliation. Specifically, we're talking about people, an individual, and then humanity with God. So at-one-ment, atonement, that reconciliation are coming back together. And so how Christians talk about that is decidedly different than Jews might, but both have that similar theme, as really do all religions there. So we hit Lent to do that, and then after Lent is what? Easter, also, by the way, white or gold. Celebration of the resurrection, huge deal. Lent, by the way, we get rid of certain things, music, alleluias. Easter, we bring all of that back. And then at the end of Easter, we have what? What's the next season? Pentecost, which is the gift of the Spirit, followed by Trinity Sunday, followed by half the year, which is called season, about the most boring title possible, the Sundays after Pentecost. It's like the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost. A great many of them, and that's sometimes called ordinary time. That's where you get the life of Jesus, stories about creation, and so on. And then it goes all the way back towards the end of November with the beginning of Advent again. All interspersed are feast or fast about the life of Jesus. There are feast and fast about various saints tucked in there. And there are always local customs, too, that have traditionally been included. There's a local saint, for example. We usually talk about Sam Shoemaker when his day comes up, or Fred Rogers, or something like that, because that's important to us. It'd be less important other places. So all the year we have is shaped. Now today we're doing a few things. It's our patronal feast, St. Michael's Day. Just brief history lesson. Why is St. Michael our feast day? Calvary is our name. Ordinarily, your feast day would be the name of your church. Like Trinity Church, their feast day would be Trinity Sunday, or St. Andrew's or St. Paul's or whatever it might be. Ours is named for Calvary. What in the world is a Calvary? Anybody know? What is Calvary? What's that mean? It's the hill on which Jesus died. And so, good, as Russ said, Good Friday is what that's connected to. It makes zero sense to have our big celebration on Good Friday, the day that Jesus died. So, of course, we can't. The most likely story is the rector in the 1920s or so decided we're going to make St. Michael our patron, our feast day. My theory is because there were lots of images of St. Michael around. At that time, there was this thing called muscular Christianity. St. Michael is an angel that beats the devil, slays a dragon. You see on the cover of the bulletin, welcome all in the name of Christ to Calvary, with this big imposing angel with a sword right on the front cover there. So it's pretty manly. And September 29th, which is the Feast of St. Michael, the best reason is because that's usually the nicest weather in the year in Pittsburgh. You never know, but most likely that's the case. So probably that's why our feast day is when it is. But something else we're doing today is what? Only particular to this congregation. We're celebrating James Knight, our sexton of 41 years, and I'll talk about that in the sermon. That makes zero sense anywhere else except for here, because of the impact he made on the congregation and all the people. And so for us, that becomes a very important day to mark that. This, by the way, this whole theme is what I'm talking about in the sermon, is marking an event, marking time in particular ways. So all that is a very brief overview of the Christian calendar of how we think about that. In the midst of that, by the way, are things like Independence Day, July 4th. We have that in our church calendar. Thanksgiving Day, another one. And then we have things, we observe all the federal holidays, and Arbor Day, and Veterans Day, and so on. All that's there. What we've added very recently, 4 years ago, is we now observe the Jewish high holidays because the Tree of Life Synagogue observes them. And so we, by default, because we have FBI and Homeland Security and all these other groups here securing the building, we become a part of their observance, whether we even want to or not. And so our whole life for a few days there is centered around this event as well. And that's how it works, is it shapes our reality, shapes what we value, shapes what we know. So again, how does the Jewish year cycle like that go?
Okay.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah. First, let me just take it up to date. What Jonathan introduced is really significant. If you think about the American calendar, now we work on the Gregorian calendar, but if you think about what are our federal holidays, such that you do this on Labor Day or don't do this after Labor Day, or right? Or we got President's Day or Election Day or July 4th, and Martin Luther King Day is now part of that national consciousness on our calendar. If you were to look at the American calendar, you'd learn something about what we value as a country, ostensibly, yes? Similarly, once you're inside the Christian calendar, there's a certain lectionary, there's a certain cycle, we're giving a definition to time relative to what's important to us. In the Jewish calendar, we have cycles of seasons also, but the idea is that while there are different New Years in the course of a calendar, so the month of Nisan in the spring, which is when we celebrate Passover, is considered the first month of that cycle, that agricultural year. And that's considered a new year. Not unlike a birthday or an anniversary is a new year, even though it shows up for all intents and purposes on your calendar and doesn't show up on anyone else's calendar. And then once we're in the cycle of the year, once the year begins, the new odometer, or the odometer, ticks over to a new year on Rosh Hashanah, celebrating ostensibly the creation of the world. There are other midrashic or interpretive traditions about what Rosh Hashanah actually celebrates. One tradition is that Rosh Hashanah is actually the celebration of the sixth day of creation when human beings are formed, and that meant 9 months before something happened, or that the Rosh Hashanah, the day of the new year, is actually taking place in a different place. But the idea is that we're going to define the new year around that which is most important to us. So the creation of the world, or the creation of humanity, or right, we're going to do that. And then as we move through the calendar year, we have obviously holidays that fall in different times that do two things. One, let me say this, back up just a sentence or two. Almost invariably, Jewish holidays, when they appear on the calendar, have both an historical agricultural context, particularly if they came from biblical tradition, and then overlaid on those agricultural moments, whether it's a harvest or a sowing or a reaping or whatever it may be, on top of that agricultural cycle, which may also be dictated by celestial bodies, whether it's the phases of the moon or the seasons of the year, on top of the original meaning of the holiday, was overlaid a national consciousness. That is to say that the holiday of Passover, which celebrates ostensibly the Exodus from Egypt, was also a springtime festival originally, on which we overlaid the idea of the Exodus from Egypt. Does that make sense? Or the holiday that celebrates the harvest, we're also going to celebrate the giving of the Torah on that day, right? Or we have holidays the holiday of Sukkot, which I think you call Pentecost, I believe, right? With the establishment of these booths, these huts you've seen. If you drive around Squirrel Hill, you may have seen them in the fall. Ostensibly celebrates the fall harvest, but the building or the establishment of these booths is to remember the nomadic existence of the Israelites before they entered the Promised Land. So it's a strange kind of mashup. You shouldn't forget that national story about being nomads or wandering. We're going to celebrate it by building a structure in which we're going to laden it with fruits and vegetables that have just been harvested. Well, you can't do much harvesting if you're a nomad. You have to be in a place long enough, right? Or the festival or the holiday of Hanukkah, which has nothing to do with Christmas, although both occur when they do in the larger solar calendar because of the winter equinox, yes, is also, in addition to celebrating that event, the winter equinox, which is when there's the least amount of light, and then from then on light begins to increase, the days become longer, is celebrated also as the festival of the revolt against the Hellenizers and the rest, and the Maccabees, and there's a national story in the midst of that. So while we track holidays to give us a sense of where we are in our particular annual revolution around the sun, so do we add to those particular nationalistic meanings or particularistic celebrations or observances. Does that make sense? Are there questions yet about calendars? Yes, please.
So why do the Jewish holidays move in the solar calendar then?
Okay, great. So a lunar calendar, we said, tracks the cycles of the moon, and if you don't make any adjustments pretty soon, holidays will begin to slip around the calendar, such that you know when your birthday is, and you have a sense of a relationship to the season. You know what it feels like at that time of year when your birthday comes. But if we didn't make the adjustment for the leap year, soon, while your birthday would still be on a given date, it would begin to move into other seasons. That's what happens in lunar calendars. In the Hebrew calendar, it's what we call lunar solar. It follows the tracks of the moon, but cognizant that that will leave us off track in 7 of every 19 years. It's a complicated algorithm, if you will. And in 7 of every 19 years, an adjustment is made in the Hebrew calendar where an extra month is inserted. That's what causes the Jewish holidays to feel like they swing or they shift. They're early this year or they're late. But they won't come too early, right? You won't celebrate Rosh Hashanah in the summer. You might celebrate it in September. Maybe you'll celebrate it in October. You're not going to celebrate Hanukkah in July, but you may celebrate it as early as Thanksgiving, and this year I believe it starts on Christmas Day. So there's a swing there, but not too much, if you will. So that's the adjustment. Some calendars are lunar, some calendars are solar, and in this case, Hebrew calendar is both lunar with the solar adjustment. Russ.
It strikes me that there are two calendars come closest together around celebration of Passover and Easter. And while the history is probably more complicated, I'm pretty sure that the fundamental reason for Christians is that all 4 of our Gospels different ways have Jesus being crucified around the celebration of Passover.
Okay.
Could you repeat that?
Rose's comment and question is that it seems like the Hebrew calendar and the Christian calendar have most synchronicity or most in common around Easter or Passover or the spring celebrations. Right. And the question is?
Well, I think the reason originally was because the Gospels all claim that Jesus was crucified and then later around the time of Passover.
That's right. So Jesus was in Jerusalem, been with his disciples, went to Jerusalem to observe the feast of Passover. And there's all these connections when you have sheep in the streets for Passover lambs. And here is the new Passover lamb. They're making that connection in a very clear, for the people at the time, way. Look, this is how the system of Judaism works. And here is what God is bringing, that he's one sacrifice for all rather than continual sacrifices. So Jesus is this new, the Lamb of God, the sacrificial lamb. So those two things are connected together. That's very clear. That's where it came from. Other feasts or festivals we have, Pentecost he mentioned, was originally an agricultural festival, and then layers added on to that. And that happened to be when they're preaching and the gift of the Spirit comes. So it'd be like, you're out at this place. It's, again, what I'm talking about in the sermon today. And then something really significant happens. In this case, the Spirit rushes throughout. And so we call it the Feast of Pentecost, which means 50 days. But it has a Jewish meaning or meanings, and then an additional Christian meaning to that. But you think about it, in the most negative, you could say, well, that's supersessionism or colonialism. We took all their stuff and just made it our own, or it's cultural appropriation. Everybody, everywhere has always done that. I will also make that point. And so some things, if you remember, are Christians related to Jews? Yeah, that's where Christianity comes from. So Jesus, all the disciples, pretty much every character in the story who's not Roman with very few exceptions, they're all Jews. They're all observing the Torah, the Jewish law. Jesus was a rabbi, a first-century rabbi within a particular tradition. They went to synagogue, they wrote and spoke Hebrew, so Aramaic was their regular day-to-day language. But all of that stuff that we're talking about with Aaron is the world they lived in. Obviously, it's 2,000 years ago world, but that same basic world, and we as Christians come from that and then add on another layer or layers of meaning to all these different stories. But in fact, you could say that's exactly what Jews have been doing from the beginning too. Think about, we do that in our own lives. Some event happens, and then as you go on in your married life or family life, you keep adding new stories of, oh, remember when so-and-so was born, or remember when we took this trip, and it gets layer upon layer of meaning to events, days on your calendar. I would say that's normal for people to do.
I like to tell couples when I'm working with them, I'm preparing them for their wedding, that what we're doing is taking an otherwise ordinary moment, a date on a future calendar, it could be your wedding day, take an otherwise ordinary moment, invest it with meaning, and create for you a memory, such that from then on, that day will have additional significance for you, because now it's your anniversary. It's not Thursday, it's Thanksgiving, right? And so I want you to appreciate, as we get started in this conversation about the high holidays and about calendars, is the significance of what calendars provide. Yes, they orient us so we locate, so we know, oh my gosh, I slept, what time I go to sleep? It's now, I slept through a whole day, right? So now a calendar allows us to know where we are at any given moment, and we share that common understanding. It lets us know where we are relative to something that happened earlier in time, such that it's your birthday, or it's the 48th year since, or what have you. But it also gives us really important information about the community of which we're a part, right? And Christianity does that better than any other calendar with which I'm familiar, in terms of constantly reminding us where we are relative to either what recently happened of theological significance in the community, or what's prospectively anticipated.
Natalie and I walk the dog every day, multiple times, and something that I have noticed, and I would love if any, particularly psychiatrists, psychologists, would like to do a study on this. I swear as a kid that Halloween decorations always seemed to be early, but it was usually the very end of September or the beginning of October. Their Halloween decorations have been up for 3 or 4 weeks in our neighborhood. That seems like a new thing. Christmas decorations for Christians, you could say, this is Leslie Reimer motto, you put them up on December 24th and you take them down on January 6th, so you get 12 exact days. Every year I'd go with Leslie, buy her wreath. They would sit in the trunk of her car until December 24th, and then she'd put it up. Most people don't, Thanksgiving, that's reasonable for Christmas decorations. But what seemed to happen everywhere was the day after Christmas, tons of people, the tree was out on the street, you had an undecorating party, we're done with that, and the next thing is probably, Valentine, it's like the school calendar, Valentine's hits and you get all these things come. It seems that Christmas is much earlier, like it's an extended season. Halloween is a much extended season. My hunch, am I the only person that's observed this?
No, we all.
I'm wondering if, because people were trapped for COVID and it's dull and dreary for so long, it's not like an extra way of celebrating for longer or making it special with all the, the stupid plastic monsters and tombstones and all that, and then all the colors. Charles?
It all depends on what candies are for sale at the CVS.
And what candies are for sale. That's a good point. But I also mean, there's orange lights all over the place. There's skeleton statues and so on. So you have observed this too? People are marking time in a different way than they did just 5 years ago. And that's partly what we're talking about. So I'm trying to figure out, why is that the case? I think the reason, as I said, is because of the pandemic, but I've not seen any article or any real study on, is this actually true or simply my observation? And if so, why is that true? Why are people doing that? I think people need to celebrate after all that and be together, and this is simply a device to do that. And again, that's a reasonable response to a difficult time. Here's another thing that I've noticed, totally different. The church, Episcopal Church is really good at having a service for everything. Blessing the animals, singing at night, I blessed, I'm not kidding, hounds for a hunt. We bless boats. We bless the shrimp fleet down in Louisiana. You bless birthdays. We bless houses. Pretty much anything you can bless, like, we'll bless it. Does it have to be living? No. Does it have to be anything particular? Well, we will bless it. We mark time and make it sacred, set apart. So here's what I find very weird. We had this whole season, I mean, American culture, world culture, the church, Calvary specifically, of 4 or so years of a pandemic. Did we ever mark the end of that liturgically? No, not that I'm aware of, not as a congregation, a diocese, or anything else. This really world-changing event happened, and it didn't just stop. It drifted away over about a year or so. And I guess we're back to normal, whatever normal means. And think of all the things that were lost, and then any good things that happened. We never said thanks for that. We never said sorry for that. We didn't mark it. An interesting parallel, and I had a priest visiting a month ago, and he said, I find myself still grieving for everything we lost. Now, I will speak personally. March 15th is when 2020, when the pandemic hit here. The week before, I was so proud, standing in the parish hall, full, kids running around, noise, excitement. And it's like, wow, I don't know if it could get any better than this. We're just about to start a capital campaign. And the next week, everything stopped. And it was just gone. And a lot of people died and moved. And my friend said, we're never caught up. We're not caught up yet here at Calvary either, but really close. And it's gone, and it will never come back. And those people who died will never come back, or moved away will never come back. So we never did that. Analogous to that, or parallel to that, in this diocese in 2008, what happened, Russ? We split into two parts. It was essentially a big, messy public divorce with so-called ACNA or ACNA breaking apart, and Calvary was the one that tried to keep it together, and we're the good guy for some and the really bad guy for others. And it was years that this went on. And you never get your friends back, you never get all your stuff back, and there's a lot of name calling and hurtful stuff and all of that. And then it was settled, largely thanks to Russ and Walter DeForest and a few other people. And the courts decided, and we decided, and let's be friends. And I've made the comment many times, I'm not ready to see those people as brothers and sisters in Christ because it's still too raw. Maybe cousins in Christ. Maybe, eventually like Lutherans, but not quite there yet. We're not. And we never mark that liturgically that I'm aware of. The split, the damage that happened, not to dwell on it or dwell on the pandemic, but to say, this was awful, this thing happened, but now it's getting better, and here's where God is bringing resurrection, or here's where we're called to now. And it seems to me in a church that is exceptionally good at doing that, we didn't do that at all. Russ?
Well, you can also observe that schisms have a very long life, including in the world of Calvary. Because when we think about the Eastern churches,
Yes.
we've been split from them for over 1,000 years. They celebrate Christmas on a different day, and I think every other major Christian holiday for them is a week or two later after ours.
We're on a Gregorian calendar. They are on a Julian calendar. It's roughly 2 weeks different. So when Natalie, my wife, this is her first day being a chalice bearer, by the way. When we met, January 6, 1995, that was the Feast of the Epiphany for me. For her, it was Russian Christmas. And it was a very big deal for both of us where that happened. But it's two different ways of mark, and then we additionally add meeting one another. So there's that split, but back to the point, has there ever been any liturgical, that is, worship as a congregation or diocese, acknowledgement of either the pandemic or the split?
I think the reason is, at the end of the war, it was November 11 a.m. We know exactly when that was.
Yeah.
We don't have an exact date.
like the pandemic or the split, it kind of just petered out a little bit over time, and then we just didn't want to talk about it anymore, move on. I'm suggesting that'd be a good idea. And so guess what? When we have the Lenten preaching series at Calvary the first time, that could be our focus, is a type of healing, letting go service. Steve?
I think that as far as the split goes, where you saw a change happen was when Bishop Dorsey came in.
The change happened when Bishop Dorsey McConnell came in.
And that kind of suggested a time for the diocese and a more positive time.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of
Yeah. I agree, got more, but my point is we never marked it. We never observed it. This was great, this was terrible, but
I know there's a question here too, but I want to just jump in. I was smiling when you said the pandemic began on March 15th. For the Jewish community, it began on March 13th because that was the last Sabbath before the curtain came down, right? So even just in our perspectives on how we mark or when we pinpoint in time something beginning is a particular, right? It's based on our own experience, such that March 15th is the day you remember. I remember March 13th because we're in this business, right? We're looking for the next Sabbath in terms of orienting us where we are. I was going to add also just trying to be cute, that pumpkin spice now shows up, right? Much earlier than it ever did. And that was always I thought it was sort of a sacrilege, you know? Who needs pumpkin spice in August? Yes?
So I was going to comment on Halloween from the children in the public school perspective.
Yep.
Right? And Halloween, well, historically it is not, right, and religiously, has become an inclusive holiday. So schools are able to celebrate Halloween and all children come together. So my children have been celebrating Halloween since August 1st. And in relationship to the pandemic, Halloween was able to be celebrated because it was outside. So from memory
Interesting,
purposes,
yeah.
everyone celebrated Halloween, and it was a huge Halloween because we were outside. Neighbors actually came out with their tables, and so their interpretation of Halloween much bigger than mine. And so we have relented, and we actually have a pumpkin that goes up September 1st, much to my dismay. It's giant, but everybody celebrates it. And so it's very interesting how Halloween, which is actually laughable that we come together on Halloween, but that has become this big inclusive thing for the children.
Okay, so the cultural milieu in which we celebrate or which we share these events, right, such that they become more universal, or they become more commercial, or they become more palatable as not overtly religious if you don't, right? For those, you know, on Facebook, if you put up a greeting for a holiday and then you add the tag, for those who observe, right? Happy July 4th for those who observe, right? Happy Rosh Hashanah for those who observe, that idea, right? So Halloween is becoming more universal.
Next week we're talking about what?
Next week we're going to focus on Rosh Hashanah in particular, the Jewish New Year, what it is that we're marking, over and above the idea that we're celebrating the creation of the world. Let's agree, I'm going to leave you with this. We're going to do Rosh Hashanah next week and Yom Kippur, sin and atonement and repentance on the 2 weeks from now. Okay, that's good. We'll leave it there.
All right, thank you all very much.
All right. If you'd like information about the Jewish holidays, and just in terms of when you might choose to attend, you can do it here, but also wherever you may be. All right? I put them.